Great to have you here, Rudina, with Emily and of course with Ed. I'm curious about, how this conversation around AI continues to evolve. We are now talking so much about the memory names. How do you see it?
Oh, hello, Carolyn. Good to see everyone. I think fundamentally, we are seeing the overall demand for AI-related infrastructure and all the way up to the application layer continue to be strong. And in my view, the shifts that we are seeing in the market sort of reflect the scarcity or overestimation of scarcity along the value chain. So on the point around NVIDIA and others, are we seeing the correction because we expected more scarcity? While on the hyperscalers, are the valuations coming back because it's becoming a lot easier to track the sources of revenue that these players will have? And oh, by the way, we think of the hyperscalers as that sort of fundamental layer at the software infrastructure layer, but each of them are much more vertically integrated with their own chips. So in many ways, we're seeing the market move toward vertically integrated players from the chip layer all the way to the foundation models rather than just the Capex spend. I don't know that we're out of the Capex demand. I think that's a multi-cycle, multi-year level of demand. I do think that perhaps we're correcting a bit for the overestimation of scarcity.
You mentioned revenue, and I'm curious, Rudina, if you can talk a little bit more about just how critical it is for investors like you to be able to pinpoint whether the spending on AI is actually translating into tangible revenue and whether we've seen that yet.
Thank you, Emily. I think it's interesting because I'm a very early stage investor. So I often say I back to brilliant researchers out of the lab and we build out a monetization plan. If anything, I would bifurcate between the next gen application layer AI companies, where not only are we seeing revenue, but the scale from zero to multi-million, hundreds of millions is a matter of months rather than a matter of years. So if anything, we are seeing acceleration. Now, beneath that, two fundamental questions. Why? Is it because, especially on the enterprise side and even consumers, we are all experimenting and trying a lot of things? Thus, is the revenue sustainable or is it a leaky bucket? Second question, though, is really pertaining to the adoption of AI more systematically. So having moved beyond the, I'm going to experiment with this in-house build tool or with a chat function of Claude or ChatGPT to something more serious. In that case, we're seeing demand for AI products to become much more of a important component, not just to the tech stack of enterprises, but to their actually business models and go-to-markets.
Rudina, what's interesting about what you and the team at Glasswing are looking at, it's so timely for today with this Morgan Stanley hyperscaler story. So you are looking at AI native SaaS, various layers of the software stack. Every time I speak to one of the CEOs at the hyperscalers, I always ask them, you seem to be pitching and working on the same kinds of technologies that your customers already do. So how do you respond to that? The idea that the hyperscalers, the cloud computing companies, let's call them what they actually are going to want to offer the same tools that you might back at that early stage?
So thank you, Ed. The underlying question is, where is the moat for the startups relative to the incumbents? And I think the moat depends. Some of it has to do with, vertical plays. I recently backed a company called Modern Industrials. They are developing an end-to-end demand planning for distributors of lumber and building materials. Very, very specific, tens of billions type of opportunity a year in terms of the revenue they can generate. But if Microsoft or Anthropic or OpenAI are going to that level of specificity, we have something to worry about. By the same token, who will be their customers? So they have to draw a line, to your very astute question, around where am I going to stop competing with my customers? And, oh, by the way, is there value in being highly, highly specialized? My view is that there is, and the value doesn't necessarily lie in the models. It actually lies in the highly specific, albeit not as broad data sets, which then, deliver much, superior outputs.
I would say if I'm a pharmaceutical maker or like in the medical field, right? And I would say that I want a data set that I'm going to play with that's very related to my field. I don't need to know about the rest of the stuff that some of the large language models are doing.
Yeah, or they
100%.
Or Rudina, something you said a moment ago is really interesting. You are backing not companies necessarily. We'll work out the business plan later. You're backing the researchers out of the lab, and like that applies at the late stage as well, right? The founder-led thesis. But those people also have specialisms, right? Does it matter to you if they have a core team of not just computer scientists, but in biology, biochemistry, etc.?
Yeah. So let me parse what I intended with what I shared. In the case of the modern industrial, I'm very much going in with a very clear understanding of how it's monetized, what's the ROI for the customer. So in many ways, that's extremely tangible and very clear around the TAM, pricing, competitive dynamics. My earlier comment related more to what I would call frontier tech. So we have already achieved what we have achieved with the large language models. What comes next? We backed a company called Recursive AI. It's about the models correcting themselves to get around the next set of issues like hallucination and other problems that the large language models have. There's a whole paradigm of neo labs and new researchers that are bypassing in many ways the capabilities of the current incumbents. Think about Liquid AI, multi-billion dollar company. They're actually doing all the processing at the edge. It's actually a whole different sort of way to bypass the need that we currently have on compute. So in those cases, you solve one of the compute problems or the energy problem or the the performance of the models, and then you worry about monetization. So it's not pie in the sky, I'll beg these smart people, and someday they will deliver something. It has a purpose, but you might not know the pricing. Kind of like how many of us would have guessed that pure consumption pricing was going to be the model. Does that make sense?
What one contemporary difference, though, is that group of 3 or 4 people can raise $1 billion out of the gate or several $100 million seed round at crazy valuation based on the value of their own intellectual capital. How does Glasswing even participate in early stage valuations like that?
Very good question. So our core product is actually, the more typical pre-seed seed stage rounds. We have a pool of capital and a product called access checks, where we write, small $1 to $2 million access checks in these gigantic rounds to have a seat at the table, to have a seat to the ecosystem, to support the founders and participate with those that actually make it big. So while our core checks are focused on building the companies from the ground up in the more typical fashion that you think of early stage venture, we absolutely get access to the big guys, and it's important. There are benefits for both.
Hey, speaking of the big guys, I just got time for maybe 1 or 2 more last questions. I'm thinking about SpaceX, which does go into the NASDAQ 100 at the end of trading today. XAI, what's your thought about that company, which seems to be, to some extent, coming from behind, but it's got certainly deep, deep pockets?
It's emerging more and more. I think, in many ways, I think of Elon's companies as all being intertwined with one holding, and the holding being Elon himself. I think it will be interesting to see what he does with XAI vis-a-vis SpaceX, and maybe even what happens with Tesla eventually. They are catching up. I think performance has improved, and to be perfectly honest, in the circles that sort of are leveraging the most cutting edge models, XAI is starting to become a real contender. Definitely coming from behind, though.
Are people are talking more about XAI?
Yeah,
increasingly, a lot more than before.
Increasingly because of Cursor, right? Like the Cursor acquisition moving so quickly, people pay close attention because it's such a widely used tool.
All right.
Yet, even with Cursor now, the next generation is saying we've bypassed Cursor. So things are moving so very fast. I go back to what becomes sustainable versus what is the flavor du jour. We shall see.
And it's fascinating too. Rudina, thank you so much. Rudina Seseri, founder and managing partner of Glasswing Ventures. We always appreciate your view. I have to say, Ed, more and more conversations I have with folks where companies are using a lot of different LLMs. They're saying they're starting to get more discretionary in terms of who's got access to what, because there is a cost.
Well, real quick, the reason people loved Cursor is you could swap in Anthropic, OpenAI, Gemini model and change it. Now Elon owns it. They're going to be allowed to do that? It's a big question.